Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Dodge this.
Hello, 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 and welcome back to the Holy Moment Podcast, where we watch films with you. And, we discuss the moments that work, the moments that don't, and the moments that reflect truth in unexpected ways. I am Nathaniel Lirio, your host today. I'm an Atlanta-based editor, as well as writer and director, and my co-host today, as well as every day moving forward forever, and best friend, Jeffrey. Introduce yourself.
Howdy, howdy, howdy. I'm Jeffrey Nichols. I am an actor and voiceover artist. I am currently based in Cleveland, Tennessee, but hopefully that changes within the year. I'm ready to start discussing movies. This is an exciting one, in the sense of it's historically important.
Yes, no, I'm very excited. This week we're actually discussing the big blockbuster summer hit of July 1954, none other than On the Waterfront. So this was actually my pick for the category Certified Salad Fresh. So for that category, we want to pick movies that are roughly ranked like in the 90th percentile, 95 percentile on Rotten Tomatoes. For me specifically, I wanted to look for movies that was ranked 95 or higher in both the critic and the audience choice. And this movie had a 99 on the critic side and a 95 on the audience side. I had never seen this movie going in, so I was completely blind. What about you, Jeffrey? Had you seen it before?
I've seen it once before. I was trying to binge a bunch of Marlon Brando films, especially his earlier stuff, because he is a remarkable actor. And I think that we see that in this film.
So you didn't watch it in film school for one of our film classes, did you?
No.
Oh, I thought it was. So I watched with my fiance and she mentioned that she had seen it before. And I was like, why have you seen this? You don't like old films. And she had watched it in one of the film history classes we took at school. So I assumed, because you mentioned last week that you had watched it before. So I assumed that's where you had seen it. But you just watch it on your own volition because you're a good cinema person.
I try to be.
Very good. Well, here's just a little bit of background on the movie for you guys who maybe don't know anything about it, very much like me. I picked this movie. I had never heard of it before. It just kind of fell into the credentials of the 95, on audience and critic. It was actually really hard. There's only like 30-ish movies that have ever scored that high before. And the issue was either A, I had seen them, like Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, or B, all of them are like 3.5 hour long. Like, I just was like, I'm not opposed to watching a 3.5 hour long movie. Actually, I have like a 3.5 hour long movie on my list that we might get to watch next week, but I didn't want to do multiple of those. So I looked for something that looked interesting, but wasn't too long. And also, I'm not the best at watching old movies. So I think once this season, I'm going to try and force myself to put an older movie on the watch list. So that's why we ended up watching On the Waterfront. But the On the Waterfront was directed by Elia. Yeah, Elia Kazan. It was released in the summer of 1954. The studios was Columbia Pictures. This same director has done great movies like A Streetcar Named Desire, East of Eden, and A Face in the Crowd. The budget was just under $1 million at $900,000, and it made just under $10 million at the box office, $9.6 million. Especially you got to think about inflation. This was, more than 50 years ago. So that's a 10% increase on its investments. That's awesome. As Jeffrey mentioned, the cast is Marlon. How do you pronounce his name?
It's Marlon Brando.
Marlon Brando. This will always be the bane of me whenever I have to host saying people's names and memorizing their names. Marlon Brando plays our main protagonist, Terry. And then Eva Mary Saint plays Edie. Edie, is that how you pronounce her name?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Okay, Edie Doyle, who plays the love interest. And those are the only two I'm going to mention in the cast just because they're our main cast, and I don't want to get bogged down with 30,000 names.
Fun fact about the cast, the priest character was originally going to be played by Frank Sinatra.
Really?
It was almost penciled in that he would play the priest, and when he lost the role, he was very upset about it.
Oh. I wonder why he lost the role. But to be honest, I mean, I don't know a whole lot about Frank Sinatra and his acting career, but I really, really enjoyed the priest character and the actor who played the priest. So honestly, I mean, who knows? It could have been even better of a performance, but I'm happy that the actor who got Father Pete was that person and not Frank Sinatra, because he was honestly one of my favorite characters.
Yeah, I mean, Frank Sinatra would have brought too much charm, too much suave to the character. You'd make the priest too handsome, which that's not what we need in this film. I think we need a rugged priest of the people.
Yeah.
And the actor that played this priest pulled that off very well.
I like it. If Pete ever had to like run to be the Pope, he could be Pete, priest of the people. And that
Yeah.
could kind of be his like running slogan.
Everybody loves alliteration, and we all know that cardinals that are up for election to be the Pope, they give themselves slogans and they actively campaign for it.
This is factual. And Jeffrey, being Catholic yourself, what was the current priest's slogan for before he became Pope? How did he become Pope? What do you use?
Okay, so Pope Francis, I would say Pope Francis, priest for the periphery.
Priest for the periphery.
Yeah.
You know, Jeffrey, I don't even know what that word means. I'm not even going to pretend.
Sort of on the edges. He elevated a lot of cardinals from places where we don't usually see cardinals, and cardinals are the ones that are typically chosen to become the next pope. So, yeah, that means that like there's more likelihood that the next pope might be from Asia or South America or Africa instead of very Eurocentric.
Diversifying the Pope. Speaking of popes and cardinals, pigeons. And you know what movie has pigeons in it? This movie. Look at that transition.
Beautiful
a quick synopsis
segue.
for this movie. Yeah, full circle. It was truly beautiful. So yeah, just a quick synopsis. A dock worker and ex-boxer, Terry, struggles with his conscience after witnessing corruption and violence with the mob-controlled docks. As he grows close to the sister of a murdered worker, Terry must decide whether to stay silent or stand up against the oppressive union boss, risking everything for justice. Featuring Brando's legendary performance, On the Waterfront is a gripping tale of morality, power, and redemption. And that's what we'll be talking about today. Right out of the gates, I wanted to open up with something kind of specific. In watching movies, I feel like sometimes deaths are pretty sad and upsetting. They really hit you in the gut. But I don't know. It doesn't always happen. I feel like either you know this character's going to die or like they're characters you don't care about. They set up the character that you love to die so you kind of can grieve before it happens, or they're a scumbag and you either are cheering for their death or you don't really care. But that scene entered into the third act when he was on the roof and the kid threw the dead pigeon at him. I was shook to my core. And I almost did shed a tear for that pigeon. I was not expecting them to kill the pigeons, let alone this like 12-year-old boy went in and murdered a bunch of pigeons. How did you feel? Like, was that upsetting to you?
That was very upsetting. It's this interesting thing, and I think a lot of people would agree, where animal deaths on screen, and we can argue about whether or not this should be the case, but animal deaths on screen oftentimes hit a little harder than human deaths. It's almost because we expect humans to die in films like these.
Yeah, you're not expecting the animal to die. That's a good point because it brings that surprising factor even more. Because I'm so sorry, people listening at homes that love their dogs and cats and treat them like they're their siblings and parents. I don't like animals that much. Like, I don't hate them. And if I go to someone's house who has an animal, like, it's enjoyable. But I don't personally like animals very much. I don't really want an animal. I think they're kind of gross. I don't get attached to animals. So I think just the fact that he just was so blindsided that it was a kid that killed this pigeon, and then he just chucked it across like the roof, like it was like it was a sack of like potatoes, was so. It just hit me out of left field. Are you a big, like, when animals die in movies, do you cry, or is that are you like, I don't really care?
I mean, I think it impacts me emotionally, especially given the fact that, I mean, these pigeons did nothing wrong. It's one thing to see a dog bite someone on screen, and then people are like, okay, we've got to put this guy down, right? It's sad, but understandable. But, like, it's just a pigeon.
Well, now you have me thinking in my mind that these pigeons were actually secretly evil, and they were like flying notes from, forgive me, audience, World War II would have already ended by 1954. World War II was like 1930s.
Yeah.
Right? That sounds right. Okay. I was going to say, what if these were Nazi pigeons and they were like flying secret messages back and forth on this rooftop and they were actually secretly evil?
I think that there's a really strong possibility that that is the case, right? Because a lot of humans, they were prosecuted for the crimes against humanity, those humans that were complicit with the Nazi regime. But I don't think I've ever heard of any pigeons being put on trial. And so I have to assume that they all went scot-free.
Not only did they go scot-free, they're probably passing down the ideology of the Nazis to the day of the new pigeon children. Case in point, you should kick more pigeons, everyone. No, I'm kidding. All that to be said, the pigeons were super cute and I really did like them. And I just was really surprised with how impactful it was, that scene of them killing the pigeons. And to give a little bit of backstory, our main character, Terry, he was taking care of these pigeons on top of a rooftop apartment complex from the main character who he set up to be killed. It was that guy's pigeons and he felt bad, so he started taking care of them. And I think it was implied at the beginning of the movie that he had his own pigeons because when he went to go set up the dude to get killed on the rooftop, he was like, "Hey, one of your pigeons flew into my pigeonhole homes. Go take your pigeon back on the roof." And then he goes on the roof and he gets shoved off. But yeah, I just wanted to open up with that and just see if, you cared about pigeons and if you were a good person, Jeffrey. Here at the Holy Moment Podcast, we're always testing Jeffrey's morality.
Yeah. I mean, here's what I'll say. I've heard that pigeons are excellent pets, right? That people just never think to get pigeons because they're viewed as pests, right? But they're not as loud as parrots. They're already somewhat domesticated, and they're cheap.
And I just imagine next time I show up at your house, you have like 30,000 pigeons, and you're like, "Dude, it was only $20. It was a good deal."
Yeah, how can you show me like all these birds, $20 for the whole package, and like you're gonna say I can't take that deal? I think I have to at that point.
Hey man, if you're ever struggling with money, then you can just like buy a bunch of pigeons as pets, and as they die, because there's too many in your house and they're all being suffocated, you can just eat them, and boom. The economy, we just solves everyone's problem. But in all seriousness, what were your, I guess, secondary thoughts, seeing as you've already watched this movie? Like watching this movie for a second time, what were your original kind of first takeaway?
Well, the interesting thing about this movie is its historical context. Or that's one of the interesting things. There's a lot to talk about with this film. But Elia Kazan, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, was a bit of a controversial director. Because everyone acknowledged his talent, right? That he was good at what he did. But this is around the same time as the Red Scare, right? And McCarthyism. And people were ratting out people that were suspected of communism, rightly or wrongly, and then those people would lose their livelihoods. And Kazan testified against 8 of his colleagues in the film industry and ended up getting them blacklisted. And this movie was, in a way, a response to the criticism that he was getting. Hence, it centers around an informer, right? Speaking up against injustice. But like Orson Welles hated the guy. And so viewing it from that lens, it was very interesting.
No, that is. I did a little bit of research in the back the history of this the film, but I didn't really, I guess, read too much about that. Do you know the people that he ratted out? Was that have to do with like communism, or is it with other stuff, or like do you know like what did he turn them in for?
So from what I've read, he did accuse them of having affiliation with communism. So I'm not sure what the extent of that affiliation was, or if these people were actually communists. But I know that a lot of people were very upset because these were people that he had worked with, and he was friendly with these people, and now they can't work in the industry anymore.
Wow. I didn't know any of that. And that actually brings up a really good point that I toyed around wanting to bring it up. I didn't know if it had enough substance to talk about on this episode, but now that you brought this up, I'm going to ask the question. While watching the movie and kind of right immediately after the movie, I was like, man, something that I love about old films that we don't really see anymore is sometimes I love that they're not always political. I love that they're not always someone's agenda or talking about some new minority group of people. And that's good, and art could be used for that. But I was like, what a good old movie that's just telling a story, some good characters, some good writing, and some good acting. And it wasn't until afterwards that I really started thinking, like, it wasn't until like it ended, I started realizing like, this might be a very political movie, because I just was thinking about when the union started.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I wonder if this is actually historically connected to the unions, and if in the day and age it was a political movie. And my fiance and I started talking about it, and she was talking about how one of the reasons she struggles with older movies in general, and I think this probably is true maybe to a lot of people, including myself, it's hard to fully appreciate an older movie if you do not know the full context of the time it is set in. Obviously, there are plenty of older movies that you don't really need to know the context, But even from the smallest of things, like for example, at the beginning of the movie when all the dock workers show up to get their work in and they start calling lots and they're picking people and they're saying these words. And I guess it was kind of the idea of like, hey, the reason not everyone's getting picked is because the mob is running it and doing things unfairly. But you also get a sense that's kind of just how the work system was. So even small things like that context, like someone who watched it probably in like the 1950s time understood like, oh, I know exactly what they're doing. And just to people us in like the 21st century, it's kind of lost on us. So having this context for this time period, not only on the really small details, but then also on like the really like major things like the political aspects and the Red Scare and the Union and everything like that. So I definitely feel like this movie deserves a second rewatch with a little bit of history and a little bit of research into it that I probably need to do. But my question after going through all of that basically was, what is something that you find older films do better than newer films? Just because I was watching it, and even though it was sparked out of ignorance when I was like, "Oh, I love how this film just isn't fueled by anything, political or anything like that." Even though it seems like it was a very highly contentious film, very political for the day and age in the 1950s. But the point is, it originally inspired the question of when you're watching old films, what are you like? Man, they don't do this anymore compared to nowadays. And that's not to say old films are better than new films. They each have their merits. Every film has a merit over another film. Well, for the most part.
It's such an interesting question because even older films are so varied, right? But there is something to how black and white films play with light and contrast
Yes.
that I think is really cool, and that we kind of miss out on in this age of color. And so it's always interesting to see newer movies that go back to that black and white for the express purpose of experimenting with light and contrast in a way that's harder to do nowadays. Like the tragedy of Macbeth, very formalist, and as I understand it, I think it's inspired by German Expressionism. I haven't seen it, but it's one of my picks. So
I'm excited to watch it. No, I couldn't agree more with you. I think we actually mentioned this maybe with the movie Come On that we did back in like October because it was a black and white film, but we were talking about harsh shadows. And I absolutely agree with you. We don't do contrast and harsh shadows like we used to. I mean, even going through film school, we were taught to not use harsh shadows. We were taught to there shouldn't be shadows. You should diffuse in such a way. And we were taught that you're like can break the rule once you understand it. But in general, it was frowned upon to see shadows. And honestly, another thing like it popped in my mind was like I won't bring it up because we already talked about it in a previous episode. But the fact that you brought it up, there was just it happened throughout the whole movie. There was a very specific scene where Terry went to go talk to Pete, the priest, at the church because he was kind of starting to think about, hey, maybe what I'm doing and being involved in the mob is wrong, and maybe I want to come clean because I have a moral. I know I have a soul, a conscience. That's what it's called. I have a conscience. But he goes to confront Pete, but Pete leaves because he has to go do something. So we just see Terry standing in the doorway, and just his shadow is cast all over the background, and it's such a contrasty shadow. And I just thought to myself, like, yeah, nowadays we wouldn't really be allowed to do that in film. Obviously, again, there are some great directors who are deciding to intentionally break that rule, and then it works out well. But it's just something you don't see as often. I think for me, it's goes hand in hand with lights. It's the cinematography. It's the movement of the camera specifically. I love moving cameras. It's great. Spielberg, really started moving that camera, and everyone kind of fell in love with it. But there's something beautiful about an intentionally non-movement shot. It just struck me the first opening shot was a beautifully composed shot of us kind of up looking down into the docks, and we could see the docks, and you get a sense of what the docks were like, and you don't have to have any movement. It's almost like a painting that's come to life. And I like that the movement is very, very simple. And I think mostly because back in the day, they didn't have the technology to move the camera every which way and do anything too crazy. But in my opinion, I'm not against moving cameras at all. I think they create beautiful shots, not an issue. What I am against is as you take constraints away from film, the more you can do whatever. There's the less you're forced with constraints, the less you have to think creatively. the less you have to be like, okay, well, we can't move the camera. How can we make this interesting? How can we block it with our actors and actresses? How can we set up foreground, midground, and background? How can we change the lighting halfway through the scene to make this visually striking? And I feel like we just kind of lost that art. I don't remember who this was, but there's a quote in one of the film books I was reading, and it just said, "The day the easy rig or the jib or whatnot was created was the day film died." And I think that's too drastic, but I do get what he's saying. You know, the fact that we can just strap a camera onto someone's back and they can walk anywhere they want creates for a lot less intentionality with our shots. So something that I've always really, really appreciated about like older films, kind of like 1950s and before, is some of that intentionality with the camera work. I think it's really beautiful.
I agree, because when your image is static, right, everything every element has to be accounted for, and every prop, right, has to be very deliberately placed to create an image that is pleasing to the eye. And that was a lot of directors' focus. Perhaps not all directors were so intentional with creating an image, like a painting-like image, but the good ones did. And Kazan, again, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this name right, but he's definitely one of the good directors.
Yeah. Yeah. The intentionality behind it and some of those shots were really beautiful. But before we get too deep into just talking about artsy fartsy stuff, as the kids say, let's talk about the first act. So give a little background. Again, we're in small. Obviously we're on the coast. Do we know what town we're in? Or are we just on a coast?
I don't really know. East Coast.
I'm gonna
for sure.
make it up. We're in the coast of Maryland, and there's water, and there's a dock, and our main character Terry, we don't really know why, but he's indebted to the mob who runs the docks, and they're kind of scumbags who, when goods come in, whiskey and potatoes and things people need, they take a cut of like every pound that's moved into the dock. They kind of get a percentages, and they work on how most mobs work, on fear tactics. But Terry, who, so sad, he's painted as a dimwit throughout the whole movie. He's not really a dimwit, but like at the beginning of the film, all the mobsters are like, this is Terry. He's just a simpleton and a moron. But so he's kind of indebted to the mob, and his brother works pretty high up in the mob. And so he's been sent a task to go and get this guy to go on top of a roof because he is planning on going to the police and kind of leaking information. So Terry shows up and is like, "Hey, your pigeon, it got loose. Can you go put it away?" And the guy's like, "Sure." And he goes up on the roof, and up on the roof waiting for them is a member of the mob who throws him off the roof. And this really strikes Terror and Terry. Terror and Terry. More alliteration. Yeah, this really strikes Terror and Terry because Terry just thought he was going to get roughed up. Terry is an ex-boxer. He's not used to violence, but something really upset him when he saw like these people kill this innocent guy. And that's really the inciting incident, is this internal turmoil that we get for the rest of the film of Terry being like, I don't actually want to work for these people. And I think it's wrong that they're taking advantage of all of the like kind of the little economy of everyone that lives on this like Maryland dock land. But the person who died, his sister, Edie, is absolutely depressed and very sad, and she's a classic goody two shoes, is trained to be a nun and doesn't understand anything about the world, and she is dead set on finding out who killed her brother. And that kind of is what kicks off this grand adventure of who killed my brother, as well as Terry trying to come to grips with, wait, am I a bad person, and what if I don't want to be this bad person? Oh, and of course Terry and Edie fall in love because it's a romance to some degree. But in that first act, Jeffrey, what would you say was your favorite moment or scene? I would say the first act is obviously from beginning up until probably when, I'm trying to think, maybe around when Terry tells Edie. That might be kind of the second act. But yeah, kind of everything that sets up everything I just mentioned and a little bit more. What's kind of one of your favorite scenes?
Favorite scenes in that first act. Well, and I always loved hearing the priest talk to the union workers or the dock workers. It's so interesting how openly they talked about faith and how it should affect the behavior of these dock workers. That's not really something that we see anymore, which I thought was very interesting. Here's a moment that I really liked. It's sort of a small moment, easy to miss moment, but Edie and Pete are, no, not Pete. I'm blanking on his name. What's going on?
Terry?
Terry, yes. Edie and Terry are at a bar, right? And they're chatting, and he sort of pokes fun at her, saying, "Hey, like, you really do care about this, don't you?" Um, and in response, she says, "Shouldn't everybody care about everybody? Isn't everybody a part of everybody else?" And that goes against the way that he has been raised, right? It's everybody for themselves. No one is looking out for the other, right? No one's ever looked after him. Even his brother falls short in looking after him. And so that challenges his worldview. And it's one of the things that pushes him towards like thinking, well, maybe I shouldn't stay quiet, right? Maybe we're all in this together, to quote High School Musical.
That's good.
So it's a subtle moment, but I don't know.
That's a great moment. And to piggyback off of that, one of my favorite things about this film, and again, for my ignorance, I haven't watched a lot of older films, so maybe more older films are like this than I realize. But I feel like the older films I've watched, there is always a certain lacking of taking time with our characters and growing them emotionally, almost through atmospheric wise. I feel like that's something we do a lot better in films nowadays to some degree. Obviously, there are a lot of films that don't do it at all, but I think we do a better job of taking time with our characters and especially in the indie space, really giving our characters space to ruminate and to grow. Something that I loved about this film is I felt like they did a great job setting up for that third and final act, but specifically it was Terry. It was his deep uncomfortableness of the gray area he lived in. Because everyone calls him a bum. Because up until this point, he has a cushy job. Basically, he doesn't really have to work because he's in with the mob, but he's also like not one of the mob's front run man, so he doesn't have to like do anything too bad morally. So he basically just has to sit around and get paid. But it's after he sees the death of that one guy that he's like, whoa, wait a minute. I didn't technically push him off the building, but I am technically the one that sent him up to the building. And this just sparks this war inside Terry for the rest of the film that I felt was so evident. And I loved that. I feel like what they do in older movies and even nowadays in movies that aren't as good, they really set up our characters like 1, 2, 3, 4, setup, conclusion, done. Like it's all tangible. It's all so obvious. It's all so clear and cut. Okay. Oh, this guy has a conscience. He's a bad guy. Now he feels bad, but this dude died. Now there's a woman, so he's going to turn his life around. And it was more or less that, but there was just a lot of like gray area, haha, because it's black and white. But there's a lot of this gray space where we just spend time with Terry, and he'll just be talking. And what I loved about Terry was how he interacted with different people, how he interacted when he was around the mob versus how he interacted when he was around Edie versus how he interacted when he was around the coworkers. You could tell there was like different pieces of him, these different farces, and he never truly showed who he was because I don't think he really knew who he was. When he was with the mob, he kind of played up the dumb idiot, like, yeah, I'm just here for some money and I'll do whatever you guys want. And then I loved when he was around Edie, he played up like he was the big macho man. He was like, yeah, no, I'm the big slick guy. You don't got to worry about nothing. But then when he was by himself, he was very, very stoic. Like when he was with his pigeons, when he was walking around, you could tell the farce of like the dimwit mob guy and the brute, hot, tough guy all kind of faded away. And he was like, I don't really know who I am or what I'm doing. And I thought that was so fascinating. And I really thought they showed this inner turmoil because that's something maybe older movies don't do inner turmoil. And maybe newer movies are a little too bad about not taking inner turmoil and showing it externally. I thought this movie did a great job of taking Terry's inner turmoil of this ambiguity of, am I a bad person? Am I a good person? What do I want out of life? And then like showing us it.
Oh, for sure. And so much credit goes to Marlon Brando. This movie is one of the movies, if not the movie, that popularized method acting and the Stanislavski way of approaching acting for film. Because prior to this, Marlon Brando was a pioneer. And I think that you can look at his performance compared to the other actors in the film that they did like a good job. They did fine jobs. But his performance, there's something about it that felt a little more real, a little more internal. And I was doing some reading on the film, and one actor, I think it was Al Pacino, said that, hey, more than the plot, I was paying attention to Terry, and I was enraptured by this character and this performance. So
Yeah, he definitely brought it to life, and like he was the one that felt the most on page saying his dialogue. And also, I mean, he was the main character. We had the most time with him. It makes sense. The scenes were written for him. But there really was something about his acting and how he just kind of went through certain scenes without always saying verbatim. That was just really atmospheric in a movie that you wouldn't describe as atmospheric at all. It's it's a very structured, plotty movie. But that actor, Brando, brings a lot of like authenticity to the role that I feel like you didn't see in a lot of actors for decades till later. On that note, I wrote down something. I'm curious. If you could have acted in this movie, Jeffrey, would you have played the role of Terry, Pete, or Johnny Friendly? And why so?
Let's see here. The role that I would have played. I don't think I would have been a good Johnny Friendly.
Yeah.
I think that there's a certain like look that you have to have. Well, maybe you don't have to have it, but it certainly benefits if you have a certain cigar-chewing physiognomy, you know? Terry would be a really fun role to play. I think that Terry would be the role I would be best suited for, because Johnny Friendly and Pete are older characters. And so I'm more similar in age to Terry.
But didn't we find out at the end of the last episode of the Holy Moment podcast that you, in fact, can play a 7-year-old female as an actor? Could this not does this not translate upwards in age? Does it only translate downwards and gender?
Yeah, I can't play any roles that are above the age of like 25. So I've tried acting as a 27-year-old before, and it's too difficult for me. It's too much of a gap as far as experience goes, life experience. So, but like I've been a 7-year-old before, and I can get in touch with my feminine side.
Yeah. Like you said, you've been 7. You've never been 27
I've
per
never
se.
been 27. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair. That's very fair.
Also, I just want to make it clear to the audience I'm using sarcasm here. I like to think that I have a little more range than that. But so if you're an agent, right, or if you're directing a movie or casting a movie, keep me in mind. I can do things.
He can. He can act. He has a face.
I have
he
a
can
face.
Say words.
I have done things, but I've done a lot of things before.
What if an agent is listening right now and like, we're looking for a dude without a face? How would you respond to that?
Because I will burn my face off. I have a stove.
Yeah.
I can do it. It's like Men in Black with their thumbs, except bam.
Jeffrey really learned from this movie about method acting. He took it to its peak of I will disfigure myself for the art.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but no. Who was your favorite character? Like, who did you, when they were on screen, who did you just enjoy watching? Because I felt like there was a lot of rich characters on screen.
Yeah, man. I think watching Marlon Brando, it's such a well-regarded performance, and he is such a well-regarded actor that I cannot fail to give him his due place as an actor. Character-wise, the priest, I really enjoyed. He just had that fire in him, and that love for people and that love for justice that was infectious, right? If I were a dock worker listening to him preach on the everyday crucifixions that they were experiencing, I would feel emboldened, right, to not be complicit in that.
Yeah, I fully agree. While maybe Terry was a more fleshed out and developed character, my favorite person to just watch on screen was in fact Pete the priest, because like you said, he just was so. I mean, at the beginning of the movie, Pete was set up as a coward. Yeah, he was at the death. Also, I totally forget about this. Like back in the day, when people died or crime scenes, did you always bring a priest, or is it just like to a dead body you brought a priest to like pray over the body?
I think I honestly don't know. I think it was a matter of maybe if they know that the person that died was a Catholic, they would call a priest in, or maybe Pete just happened to be in the area.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's common that back in like I don't know 1950s 40s whatever. I think it was common that like when there was a dead body or someone died, you would bring a priest in. I don't know if they needed to know they were Catholic or religious to some degree, but I think because when Dugo, the guy that got crushed by all the whiskey bottles in the second act when he died, one of the characters, the first thing that said is he doesn't need a doctor, he needs a priest.
Hmm.
What it could have been a funny line, but I do think there is historically some accuracy to like priests would come to like dead bodies and like pray over them. I don't. Maybe I'm totally wrong. Maybe I'm just lying to you right now. Who knows?
No, I mean
Not
that
me.
feels correct.
Um, and if it feels correct, it's historically correct. I
It
do believe
must
that's
be.
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It feels good.
It
Um,
feels correct that you owe me $1,500.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it feels correct that you told me once that you support the Nazi pigeons. So
Well, it feels correct that you're lying and you should leave.
well, guys, we just experienced postmodernism at its finest here on the Holy Moment podcast. Redefine your truth. No, no, I'm kidding. But the point I was making was, yeah, so he shows up at the beginning of the movie when Eddie's brother gets killed, and Eddie, not Eddie, Edie, I'm gonna call her Eddie for like the rest of this podcast. Edie accuses the priest of being, a coward, complacent, not doing anything. Would God sit by and let this happen while you just hide in your church? And we get like a little mini arc with the priest. It's awesome. We watch Pete kind of start out off this cowardice. Well, I stay in my church and I pray for people, and that's what's good for them. And then he's like, no, I need to go out into the out of the church and help people because that's where Christ is helping people, not just in the church. So I love that Pete actually gets his own small arc, and I'm also so happy he doesn't die. Man, the first scene he was in, I was like, this is a dead priest for sure. So the fact that he lived made me super happy. But I thought it was really cool. His acting always felt like it came from a place of like astonishment and disgust, like as if he had never stepped out of the church before until Edie had like called him out on it. And then he went out there and he's like, how have you guys not unionized? How like I love that was like at the beginning of the first act when he goes to like the docks to see how everything is like folding out because he felt called out and he's like, you know what? She's right. I'm a coward. I should at least go to the docks and see what's happening. And he is so shocked. And his first thought is, what? You guys need to unionize. What are you doing down here? I thought that was awesome. But he was such a fun character. And I love that he was like the moral backbone kind of like anytime Terry was kind of struggling morally, Pete would swoop in and yell at him. I love that he would just yell at people. He would yell at people and they would do better. And I think maybe sometimes we need more of that in society.
Yeah, I mean, that is a very interesting point that Pete at the beginning is like, you guys should unionize. Where's your union in all of this? Meanwhile, he does not know that, the mob controls the union, right? If you had been out of your church, then perhaps you would have noticed that. And you wouldn't have been so naive about it. And so, yeah, I think that's a very interesting thing that I hadn't considered prior.
Yeah. Yeah. Another little thing with Pete that I really appreciate is like, I feel like nowadays the church gets a bad rap in film. And I understand. I'm not saying that the church can't be criticized through the lens of film and that sometimes it does deserve it. But I feel like the church up into a certain point in history was revered and respected, and they were the people that kind of had wisdom and good information and morals. And then just at some point, I don't know, like 80s, 90s, early 2000s, they just became the punching bag. They're all greedy. They're all actually duplicitous and bad things. They're all cunning and sexual abusers and thieves. And again, I'm not saying that doesn't happen in the church, so I'm not saying that shouldn't be brought to light. But it was really refreshing to see that like Pete was a good man and he actually was trying to do a good thing because of his religious convictions and that he held to those convictions. And I really appreciated that about this film.
Oh, me too. Me too. That was very refreshing.
It was. It wasn't refreshing, and we got to talk about it because we have now watched two older-ish movies back to back. And you know what? Both movies did a really bad job with, Jeffrey.
What?
Just take a guess. Take a gander. His big brain is churning. It's thinking so hard. The neurons are firing. If we could see Jeffrey's brain right now, it would be magnificent. What will his answer be?
Ah, man, I'm drawing a blank. Okay. Editing. I'm just gonna throw things out.
I actually like the editing of both movies. No, it is. Well, this just shows how much Jeffrey really does hate women. It is the absolute horrible portrayal of women in both movies. So all the women out there, you know Jeffrey doesn't stand for you. You know I do. If you guys aren't watching the video podcast, you should go pull it up. Jeffrey looks very horrible. Looks sad.
Listen here. Of course, that was on my mind, but it was just so obvious that
Yeah.
I didn't think to bring it up because I assumed that, of course, everyone would know. Nathaniel, audience, I am a big supporter of women. I love women. I've only ever dated women.
If Jeffrey ran for Pope, that would be his slogan. I love women.
No, you're so right, though. Her character was pretty bare bones, and she had a similar problem to the female lead in Groundhog Day, in that they're both kind of too good. And, it's understandable. They're serving as foils to these characters that are very morally compromised. But also, I feel like there has to be a way to write a female character that is morally upstanding and not kind of a caricature, you know?
Yeah. My I thought they did better with Edie in some regards than they did with, gosh, I don't remember the woman's name from the last movie. Um
Rita?
Rita, yes. So I think they did some things better with Edie than Rita, but I think they did some things much worse. So what I liked about Edie was I did believe her goodness, her moral stance, and like she's a very perfect person. I believe that more. It was a whole point in the movie how, because her father was another minor character, the father of the brother who was killed at the beginning of the movie. He was kind of talking to his daughter Edie, and he was like, your mom and I scraped up pennies and put them in jars so we could get you away from this disgusting muckville town to put you into the nunnery. So like it's understandable why she has this very ignorant outlook on life and doesn't know anything about crime and the bad underbelly of the city. So I believe that. Like I like that her character was like, "Hey, I believe in people. I think all people should respect people." So I believe that her moral backbone was that strong. What I didn't love was it wasn't that her morality fell apart, but just how she interacted with our main character Terry was pretty upsetting, pretty not great. There was just a lot of like Terry kind of being a bad dude and kind of basically admitting in front of her, I helped murder your brother. And she was like, nah, I'm not going to ask you why. Or she would ask him questions like, wait, that homeless man just mentioned that you basically killed my brother. What's up with that? And he's like, no, don't listen to that, honey. He's homeless. He's crazy. He don't know what he's talking about. And she'd be like, okay. So I was fine with her moral stances. I had issue with her choices of interacting with Terry and not trying to investigate. Because the whole movie, she was like, I'm investigating the death of my brother. But she was so blind. Like, what was she blinded by her love for Terry after meeting him one time? And he was kind of a jackass in the one time she met him. So I just didn't like how it was the classic, I fell for a guy and I fell for a guy because he was vaguely charming and we need you to fall for the guy because you're the dumb woman. And that was pretty upsetting. But again, I really did like her foil I think she was a better foil to our main character than Rita was to Phil in Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
Because Rita, just when she was drinking and she's like, I like to drink to world peace. That was so dumb and cheesy. And it's like, why, Rita? Who are you? Why do you like, I guess you're a good person. But I like Edie makes sense why she's a good person, but it doesn't make sense why she stuck around with Terry whatsoever.
I agree with that 100%. I had the same problem with West Side Story because you've seen West Side Story, right?
Once again, no.
Whoa!
I have not.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to talk about Romeo and Juliet, which you are familiar with that, right?
No. Yeah, I do know about Romeo and Juliet, the first like cuckold story to ever be told.
Yeah, so Romeo kills a beloved family member of Juliet, right? And Juliet, she's really upset about this for like a second before they proceed to make out.
I mean, it's understandable. Have you not all been in that position? a hot woman or guy kill someone you love, and then, he still is hot. So what are you supposed to do? Be mad at him? No.
I mean, honestly, if my girlfriend killed one of my family members, I'd think, "Ooh, she's a rebel. She's kind of edgy." I think I'm gonna fall even more in love with her.
What I'm hearing is Jeffrey is the new cuck story.
I mean,
kidding.
That's what we need to spice up our love life. Is she needs to kill, like, I don't know, my dad or something.
No, not your dad. Not Mr. Nichols.
No, I love them. I love my parents and I love my girlfriend. I love my family. I don't want any of them to die.
I think by the end of this episode, we're gonna have a really strong foundation of you running for the papacy, however you say it.
The papacy.
The papacy. Yeah, I really think we will have like a good foundation of Jeffrey Nichols for Pope 2020 or like 2030.
I love that you're volunteering me to this. I've never said that I would do that, but I love your confidence.
Yeah, I think you make a great Pope. I mean, you Pope Nichols. I mean, that sounds pretty good.
Oh,
Pope Nichols.
I'd get to like choose my papal name.
Oh,
because
it's not just Pope last name.
No, the current Pope Francis. I think his name was Jorge Bergoglio.
Oh,
and he chose
interesting
Francis after Saint Francis.
Okay, well, to everyone listening right now, please bear with us. The Holy Moment Podcast has great content just like this all the time. Jeffrey, what would your Pope name be?
Ooh.
This has so much to do with the movie we've been talking about, I promise. Watch me connect it after this.
I'd say it's gotta be something cool.
Pope Sebastian.
Pope Sebastian. I know there's a Calixtus or two. That's kind of cool. Pope Calixtus. Calixtus. I don't know anything about them, but I just know that they exist.
Yeah. Well, speaking of funny names for people, what did you think about our main protagonist, Johnny Friendly? What a funny name, because guess what? He wasn't friendly. But yeah, how did you think he worked as the actual antagonist to the story? And he is the mob leader who is kind of inflicting all this pain and corruption in the city and poisoning it. And at the beginning of the movie, we're kind of led to believe that Terry and Johnny Friendly are on good terms, but you kind of can tell that, like any mob boss, Johnny Friendly is a dick and kind of forces. I mean, Terry still did things of his own volition. Not going to say he didn't, but he kind of was charismatic and also like that classic. I'm charismatic, but I'm threatening you at the same time.
Yeah, had
him under his spell. So yeah, how did you think he worked as an antagonist?
I think that he's a very classic antagonist, right? Just your typical mob boss who gets what he wants through coercion and physical force and threats, and there's not a lot to him emotionally, but I don't think we need that either. I think that he serves his role in the story very well. And I love the actor. I think he's from 12 Angry Men. He played the one standout jury member, the one that comes around at the very end.
I'd love to say I know what you're talking about, but I have not also seen 12 Angry Men.
What?
Did you not hear me at the beginning of the film, Jeffrey? I hate old movies. That's probably deeply rooted in me hating old people, but nonetheless.
Nathaniel Lirio, my friend. Okay, my wild card, I'm changing it from Paper Moons to 12 Angry Men. That is a seminal piece of cinema that you have to watch.
I think I've seen a scene or two of it because 12 Angry Men was like based on a book, right?
I actually don't know.
It was based on a book or a play, but I'm pretty sure because we read it like freshman year of high school. So like 10 years ago, I read this, and I think our teacher, Miss Harding, made us, or we got to. I mean, it's cool when you get to watch TV in school. So we watched a scene or two. But I also remember being 15 and being like, this is in black and white. This is stupid. And guess what? 25-year-old Nathaniel thinks. This is in black and white. It's stupid. No, I'm kidding. I like black and white movies sometimes. Yeah, I'll happily watch it. I definitely need to make myself watch older movies. But anyways, yeah, I agree with you. Johnny Friendly serves the movie as much as it needs to. And the reason I say that is because, yes, this is a story about Terry standing up to the evil in the city, but it's not your classic hero versus bad guy. It really is, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, it really is this inner turmoil of Terry going back and forth, kind of being tugged on by the mob. And one scene, he's on a date with Edie, and she's telling about this is what it's like to love humanity. And the next moment, he's being chased down by the mob, and they're like, "What the heck are you doing talking to this woman, man? You got to go be a shit person like we are." So like you just see his morale, his internal is. You just see his morals on the inside being tugged in two different directions. And I really feel like that's where the story is.
Yeah.
And so it's not about like a great hero versus a great villain, or the morals of Sauron versus the morals of Frodo and great and evil. It's more of like the morals of Terry on the inside.
Yeah.
And what does it mean to be good? And what do I want to stand for? Because it wasn't even like, what does it mean to be? It was like, what does it mean to be good? To be good is to like, stand up for your brethren and to like not be a bad mob person. But even more than that, it was like, what kind of man do you want to be? What type of person do you want to be when you look other people in the eyes? Do you want them to respect you? Do you want them to like, trust you? And I thought that was really cool. So all that to be said, I don't think Johnny Friendly needed to be this deep character because it wasn't really Terry versus Johnny Friendly. It was more Terry versus Terry, with Johnny Friendly kind of being just a component of that.
Yeah, he's like the devil on Terry's shoulder.
Yeah, and Edie is the angel on his shoulder, which is something I love because also we talked a lot about this in the last episode. You guys should go watch it. Episode 10, where we watch Groundhog Day. Again, this idea of, did Phil become a better person because he fell in love with Rita and Rita was a good person? Or did Phil become a better person because he actually was confronted with what does it look like to be a horrible person forever? And, now that I'm thinking about it, there are so many similarities between these two movies. The question is, did Terry become a better person because he was confronted with Edie, whom I guess he now loves for some reason because he met her once, as you do in the 1950s, you meet a woman once and you're like, I'm going to have babies with her. And then you do. But was it in meeting her and her kind of rubbing off on him morally that made him want to be a good person? Or was there something going on with Terry from the beginning that was divorced of Edie and he was having his own moral dilemmas? And you definitely can say, I mean, even Terry said out of his own mouth, he's like, I've never had nothing good happen to me and make me want to be a better person until I met her. But before we ever meet the character of Edie, at the very first scene of the movie, when Terry sets up the guy and then he gets killed, and I love his acting. He was horrified. He did not know. He genuinely, to the deepest part of his bones, did not think they were going to kill him. And I believe that. I believe that he really thought they were just going to rough him up. Little side note. I loved all of the lingo of this movie that I couldn't. It's just like the 1950s lingo of what they're saying, but they're saying it in a different way. It was so funny.
Yeah. I thought you were going to lean on him a little,
Yeah, lean on. Yeah. I was like, there's a word I can't remember. Yeah. I thought you were just going to lean on him a little bit. You didn't lean on him. You pushed him. And then they're like, yeah, we leaned on him too hard. But the point is, when he saw the death of that guy, you could see how much it upset him. And so therefore, okay, this guy has morals long before the female character comes into play, which made me like the movie a lot more. Again, like how I said with Groundhog Day, if he was just a dude in the mob that loved killing and then he met a woman, he fell in love with her and he found out the woman was good, so therefore he has to slowly become good, it would have been a lot less interesting story. But it's clear that Terry has had internal struggles inside for a long time that he's been running from, but meeting Edie is the catalyst to make him be forced to confront them, but it is not the first time he has had them. It's not the seed. It's not the origin of the conflict. It is just the catalyst that makes him face the conflict in his heart.
Yeah, it's. I think that Edie plays a similar role to Rita in that neither of them are the cause of his transformation, but they both have a role, right? It's mostly a wrestling with themselves that begins with them. Realizing, I am dissatisfied with the way things are, and the way that things are, it's partly because of who I am. And so who I am has to change. Yeah, because Terry, that was a pivotal moment for him, watching Joey die and realizing he had a role to play in that. And so Edie is speaking to that side of him that was uneasy at his complicity, and cultivating it, but she did not create that feeling in him.
And that segues us nicely entering into the third act. So now, the seed was planted in Terry. He doesn't love what he's doing. He's starting to feel even morally worse as he hangs out with Edie more and more. And he gets to the point where he's thinking about testifying. And that's something I love about this film also. Terry keeps getting confronted by everyone. He gets confronted by the priest. He gets confronted by the girl he likes. He gets confronted by the mob. He gets confronted by his brother. He gets confronted by children. He's always getting confronted of like, who are you and what are you standing up for? Are you on our side? Are you on their side? Are you on what side? And he always is just that, like, again, like there's so many layers to Terry. And anytime he gets confronted, he like pulls back. He like becomes a shell. He becomes so insecure and so wishy-washy. Again, just like look when he's hanging out with Edie. He's a big macho man. He has everything in control. He knows what he wants. But the moment people start asking, what do you want? What do you want, Terry? What do you want to stand up for? I don't know. Who knows? Like, what about it? He just starts deflecting. And it's in that deflecting that it's so clear that he's in such agony on the inside because he just doesn't know who he is or what he wants. And he doesn't know what is right. He doesn't know up from down. And I thought that was just so well done. But anyways, it comes to a boiling point where he has to make a decision. Is he going to testify against the gang members, the mob boss, or is he going to D&D, as they say in the movie, dumb and death? I kept loving, they're like, they're just into their D&D. I just kept hearing Dungeons and Dragons, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we come to this boiling point of this beautiful scene where Terry is in a taxi car with his brother. And his brother's trying to convince him, go take this new job, take the money, shut up, don't say nothing. And the brother at first is like, obviously he's going to do this. He's going to take the money. He's going to be a good kid. He's a good kid. He's kind of dumb. He'll do what I say. And Terry's kind of like, I don't really know. And the brother, what do you mean you don't know? Like, you know what to take the money, be dumb, be quiet. And Terry's like, I don't know if I want to do that anymore because finally for the first time, he's starting to realize maybe I can do what I want. And maybe what I want is to do the right thing. This all comes to a head where he does end up testifying against the mob. And I don't know anything about law, but they like don't go to jail, which is weird. So he testifies. They're like, cool, these mob people have obviously been doing bad mob things. We're going to slap you on the wrist. And basically, if you do anything else bad, we're going to go to jail. So now we're at the climax where he gets out of the trial, but everyone is turning their nose up at him. They're all kind of like, hey, you did the one thing you're not supposed to do. You're not supposed to rat on your friends, which now knowing Jeffrey, the history you talked about with the director and what he did is even more interesting. But then we finally have that final altercation where Terry's had enough of it. And he's like, you know what, I'm not going to live in shame for doing the right thing. So he goes down to the docks and he confronts Johnny Friendly and they get into a scuffle. And I really think it's a little bit of propaganda now, kind of knowing the backstory of the director. But I thought it was really powerful of him going down there and him fighting and no one standing up for him. And then how the priest comes down here and is like, hey, you have to get on your own 2 feet and you have to cross the finish line by yourself. Because basically he gets the shit beat out of him. And then all of the dock workers are like, if Terry can get up and go into work, we'll follow him and we'll stop being pushed around by the mob boss. But if he can't, then clearly his conviction isn't strong enough. Clearly we can't get out of the oppression and the tyranny of the mob boss. And this is how we live forever. And the movie ends with an epic Terry stands up and walks into the docks and the door closes and we roll credits. And I just thought that was such a powerful scene, especially because I thought when Terry's getting the crap get beat out of him, I thought all the dock workers were going to come to his aid and save him, but they didn't. He really was on his own. And I wonder if it was at all a little bit of vindication of the director being like, I turned in these people and no one stood up for me. I was there doing it alone and none of my friends came to my aid as I was being harassed. But all that to be said, Jeffrey, what did you think of the third act and that climax and how it ended with Terry being beaten up and then Terry getting up and walking through the front doors, finally deciding kind of who he is? He is a man of conviction. He is a man who's going to stand up for the people around him.
I really like it because all throughout this movie, we see a Terry that is passive, right? Things kind of happen to him, and things have always happened to him, and he's let it happen, right? And he's always been a fighter, but has he ever really fought for himself? No. I mean, he had a chance to be a contender, as he says, right? But when he was told, hey, you're going to lose this fight, he lost the fight. And now he realizes, okay, I can fight for myself. I can still be a contender. I can still do some good. And it's a great arc and him, finally walking over and going into work. That's him doing something for him. And in doing something for him, he's doing something for all the other dock workers, showing them that they can do the same. They don't have to let things happen to them. They can be an active character in their own stories. And so, yeah, I thought it was very beautiful, very poignant.
No, I like that point, that last point you made with the idea of Terry's never done anything for himself. So, yeah, well, it would have been awesome when the dock workers would have stormed down and helped Terry and stopped Johnny Friendly and all his goons from beating him up. That would have been cool, but it was something nice about Terry having to do it himself.
Yeah.
And stand up. Because also something we've completely glossed over, Terry is not free of he's not been perfect. He's done bad. He was duplicitous and a murderer. He's done bad things. He knew what the mob was doing. He wasn't ignorant. So I think it's also good to show Terry really redeemed himself and he put himself in a position to help others, and he was able to do it kind of his own choice, of his own gusto. And I think that was really redeeming of Terry's character. With that being said, now that we've kind of gone through the whole movie and all of our thoughts, I wanted to ask you, what was your holy moment? To those listening at home who are maybe new, our podcast is called The Holy Moment, and the reason it's called The Holy Moment is, long story short, a film critic back in the day kind of coined the term The Holy Moment, and what we mean by the holy moment is basically what was the moment or idea or component or sequence of the movie that stood out to you and was the strongest moment. Obviously, not all films stand the same on equal grounds. We know that, but we also know how hard it is to make films. Jeffrey and I, having made multiple films and working in the film industry, it is grueling and exhausting, and sometimes you can give it your all and you can still end with a bad product, and it happens all the time. So we want to, obviously we're going to rip on and make fun of some movies, but we always want to take a moment to say, hey, these people spend a lot of time, effort, energy, and money and creativity making this thing that we got to enjoy. What is the holy moment, and kind of praising it for that. So with that being said, Jeffrey, take it away. What is your holy moment on the waterfront?
I think that my holy moment, and I've done this before, where it's not one particular moment. Rather, I think as an actor, I have a great appreciation for how Marlon Brando portrayed Terry. And it was such a human performance. And he pulled a lot of weight in making Terry who he was. And so I'm going to say Marlon Brando's performance of a man experiencing great internal turmoil. And his arc of transforming himself into someone that is passive, that does not intervene on behalf of other people or even on behalf of himself, into someone that does the right thing for others and for himself.
That's a great answer. And honestly, it wasn't until talking to you today that I really have a greater appreciation for the acting. And this is one of those movies that I genuinely mean it, that I really look forward to watching it on a rewatch for so many reasons. To be honest, one of them being, for what we kind of said at the beginning, older movies with the context, but also older movies are harder to understand audibly. It will often take me a lot longer to understand what's going on because there's no subtitles. It's harder to see because of the dark shadows and contrast, and the dialogue's so muddy. It sometimes takes 2 or 3 times to watch it through. Oh, I know what the next scene is, so I can start to use context clues to know exactly what they're saying. So that and many other reasons I want to rewatch this movie. But yeah, one of those reasons would be Brando's stellar performance. For me, the holy moment, I don't think I've ever done this before because I usually, again, there's no wrong or right reason, there's no right or wrong to this answer, but I usually give like Jeffrey, a longer, this whole idea or concept of the movie, which is totally fine. But for me, I think this is the first time I actually picked a specific scene. And I'm going to read a quote from that scene real quick and see if you guys know what scene I'm talking about. You know what's wrong with our waterfront? It's the love of a lousy buck. It's making love of a buck and a cushy job more important than the love of man. And the man that said that was none other than Pete. It was the scene in which Dugan, who was one of the dock workers, that Pete, the priest, convinced, hey, if you care about people, if you're a Christian, as you say, if you just give a rip about humanity, you'll stand up against the mob. He does. He was planning on spilling his guts, as they say, to the officers the next day. but he has an untimely accident at the dock and he's crushed by a bunch of whiskey bottles. And the priest comes on down to do his priestly thing. I don't know what he was going to do. I guess pray for the body. But he's so clearly torn up because in a few scenes beforehand, Pete made an agreement with Dugan. He's like, hey, if you stick your neck out, I'm also going to stick my neck out. And Dugan's like, will you take it all the way? Are you a man of your word? Kind of like another inciting incident for the mini arc that Pete has of like becoming a man of his word, kind of a little bit slightly like Terry's. But Dugan is like, yeah, will you become a man of your word? Will you stick your neck out if I stick my neck out? And he says, yes, I will. So then when he finds out that Dugan died because of what Pete had asked him to do, he shows up at that dock. And it was probably my favorite scene of acting. I would say the overall performance of Brando was better, but this one scene from the priest was so tangible. He shows up, he's a priest, he's supposed to pray for the body, bless it, ask that it has safe travels. But instead, he starts to reprimand all of the men around him. He could be reprimanding the people that did this, the people that killed Dugan, but instead he starts to reprimand the men that stood by and watched a bad, evil deed happen. And it's a great, great bit of dialogue. I think it's awesome convictions. Again, it's showing a religious person in a positive light, which I think was really cool. And just how this priest went from being a coward to he is on fire. This guy died kind of from his actions, just how our Joey died at the beginning of the movie because of Terry. Dugan died because Pete asked him to stick his neck out and to testify. And so Pete is so disgusted with how the men are standing by and watching evil happen. So he goes on this long kind of monologue of like your love for money and your fear for standing up for what's right. But most importantly, your loss of the love of your brother and sisters around you has let this man die. And it's despicable. And then he ends it with one of the most chilling things I've really seen in movies in a long time. Because again, you remember he showed up and like he kind of began to start praying for the body. And while he started praying, he gets really angry and then he starts ranting at everyone. And then he looks at the body, he looks at everyone, and he holds an uncomfortable eye contact with everything. Looks, we get close POV shot or like close up shots of everyone's eyes, making eye contact with Pete. And then he just looks them all dead in the eye and he says, amen, and kind of walks away as if my prayer to Dugan was me reprimanding you and calling you all cowards and calling you out. And I just thought that was such a great written scene for all those reasons I just mentioned. That was my holy moment and probably my favorite moment in the whole movie other than Terry on the roof with the dead pigeons. Cause I thought that just peeled back the final layer of the onion of who Terry was. I thought that was really a really great scene. But with that said, overall, I really, really love this movie. Again, I don't watch enough black and white movies. And I know not all of them are going to be my cup of tea, but I thought this movie did such a great job with the atmosphere of character development, which you don't really get to see in older movies. And I thought they really nailed it. For being such a plotty, structured movie, we spent so much time with our characters and they felt alive. So with that reason, we're going to move into our ranking. And again, we haven't fleshed out our ranking system. We're just doing 1 through 5. If anyone listening at home has a fun idea of how we can rank these movies, let us know. But I'm going to give this a 4.2. I really, really was impressed. And I really think after ruminating on it and talking to you today, Jeffrey, I've only enjoyed it more and have been more and more impressed with the writing and specifically the acting. And it'll be a movie that I will watch soon in the future. So for those reasons, I will give On the Waterfront a 4.2.
I love that you gave it a 4.2 and not a 4.5. That took me so much by surprise. I never hear that.
Yeah, 4.5 is too high. I'm sorry, it's not a 4. It's a 4.2.
I respect that a lot. And in the spirit of innovating our ranking structures, I'm going to give it a 4.3.
This is Could you explain the math behind your rating, please? Like in high school when you had to show your work on your math exam.
All right. I think that as a performer, Marlon Brando's performance is important. And so not only was it compelling, it's also just interesting to observe. Because again, this is an early example of method acting in film. And so for that historical interest, that adds like another 0.1 into my estimation of the film. But I mean, this is a classic, and the story is poignant. The characters hit. a lot about this film, even from a meta sense, is interesting to me,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And that factors into my final assessment.
Yeah. No, that's a very good reason. Before we wrap things up and pick the next movie and tell you guys where to go follow us and like us and subscribe and all that fun jazz, I should have brought this up earlier where it fit better into the flow of the podcast, but I totally forgot until right now. But I would be very upset with myself if I did not mention this because I don't. I had such a strong reaction to a specific scene, and I just wanted to bring it up just for a brief minute. The scene where Terry breaks into Edie's bedroom and she's yelling at him to leave her alone. And then, I didn't think it was going to be anything super graphic. Like, I didn't think she was going to be like sexually assaulted or anything too graphic. I really didn't know where the scene was going to go because, background, Edie and Terry had spent the first act in the middle of the second act getting to know each other. Ooh, maybe they love each other. Maybe they're blah, blah, it's so cute, blah, 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 blah. But then Terry starts having a conscience. And with Pete's kind of pushing, he's like, hey, you should go tell her that you indirectly killed her brother. And Terry does this. She tells him, or he tells her. And she kind of leaves the movie for like the next act because she's very sad and depressed. And, she did what women did in the movies in the 1950s. She went and cried. Which again, I do not think is a good depiction, but that's what they did. So she's kind of out of the movie for a minute, but we also know they're on bad terms. She just found out basically that Terry killed her brother. Okay. So that's like where we left off emotionally. And the next thing we know, Terry shows up. He's also in a very emotional spot. Some bad things. He's basically kind of at the tipping point of what is he going to do morally. Shows up at her doorstep and is banging on the door and she's crying. She's like, go away. And then he breaks the door down. And then he goes in. I was like, oh, what's going to happen next? I'm so interested. And then he's like, tell me you love me. And I was like, well, that's weird. First off, you haven't even known her that long. Secondly, you killed her brother and she knows it now. And then like he chases her into the apartment and yells at her to tell her that she loves him. And then he just kisses her. And then she's like, oh, I'm in love with you. I guess I kind of get what they're going for. And I feel like we've seen it in similar films where there is this like, really there's a lot of tension between the two characters and for some reason they can't be together but the audience knows that both of them want to be together, but she's like, no, I can't be with you, and then they kiss and it's like, but I really do want to be with you, blah blah blah. That didn't feel like this at all. This felt super weird and rapey, and it was really uncomfortable just when he was like yelling like love me and say it, and then he kissed her and she was like, yeah, I'm in love with you now. It was just, I feel like I had to say something because, man, that was just an uncomfortable scene. And I genuinely feel bad for like the depiction of females in the movies in this time period. So I'm really interested to watch more movies and to see if it was just like the stereotype and the common place of how they viewed women in the day, or if this was a really bad version of it or what it was like. But I've not watched this scene in a long time. Because in movies nowadays, when they do disturbing, upsetting things, it was like the choice. Like, they're trying to make a point with it. But when they did this, that it was like, this is normal. This is fine. And that's what made it so upsetting.
I had a very similar reaction to a scene from Rocky. I watched that several months ago, and I'd completely forgotten about this scene. Have you seen Rocky?
Once again, Jeffrey, you make me look like a bad film person because I've not seen Rocky either, any of them.
Well, just based on that scene alone, we should definitely watch West Side Story and Rocky because there are similarities, but I'll leave it at that.
We should, hey, if we have any female people out there listening to us, if you guys have any movies that you really feel like represent the female gender well, let us know, because we are, at the end of the day, two white guys. Well, wait, I'm only half white. I guess a white guy and an Asian guy. I always forget that I'm Asian sometimes. But yeah, we're two dudes. We don't always know what females how they want to be portrayed in movies. I will say all my female friends give me shit because I hate Pride and Prejudice. Like, you just don't understand women. No, it's a bad, boring movie, and I will die on that hill. Don't tell me to watch that movie.
Oh, that's, Nathaniel speaking for himself. I actually happen to enjoy that movie quite a bit. But
that makes you a bitch. I don't know what to tell you.
Hey, if that makes me a bitch, then a bitch I am. But hey, bonus points, lady listeners, if it's an older film. Because if there's like an old film that you feel gives y'all a fair shake, I don't know, that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, I would love to watch it. Well, awesome. with all of that being said, before we do our outro, we got to pick next week movie. So again, because we're kind of reset the season or doing things a little new to all those who maybe this is their first episode listening to us, we trade hosts every other week. So I hosted this week. Jeffrey's going to host next week. Then I'm going to host, and he's going to host. Blah 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 until the sun burns the earth up, as it does. But we also have categories. So we have 6 categories chosen, and I'm going to tell you the categories, and then after that, we're going to spin a wheel, and it's going to choose one of Jeffrey's movies of said category. So for Jeffrey's movies, we still have all the categories left because we have not done one of Jeffrey's movies yet. We have a debut film, which is a director, and it's their debut film.
Or an actor, right?
Oh, yeah, I guess I never thought about it. Yeah, I guess it could be an actor as well. I did mine as a director, but I guess it could be a debut actor. Wouldn't that be funny? It's like a debut background actor. This is the first background actor this person's ever been in. But yes, debut film. And then we have Oscar Could Have Been. So it was nominated to win an Oscar, did not win, unfortunately. We have Cult Classic, pretty self-explanatory. Salad Certified, which On the Waterfront was my salad certified. So again, has to kind of be like 90, 95 on Rotten Tomatoes. I like to do it where it's 95 above on both the critic and the audience. But if you don't want to do that, Jeffrey, it's not the end of the world. Rancid Ass Tomato, which is the opposite. It's like 5% or lower on Rotten Tomatoes. And then Wild Card. Wild Card is just a movie that you really want to talk about and you can pick. With that being said, I will pull up Jeffrey's wheel now and spin it.
Okay, drum roll, please. And the winner is...
Is it 12 Angry Men?
It's 12 Angry Men.
Oh, good. Okay, another black. Gosh, guys, I like black and white, but 2 weeks in a row. Okay, all right. Is it longer? Do you know how long it is?
No, I think it's a pretty tight movie. It's, I think, about the same length as On the Waterfront.
Okay, well, good.
It's
It'll
a great
be good
movie.
to review 2 movies. Because it'll be good to review 2 movies around the same time frame, like 2 older movies. Well, awesome. Well, sweet guys. Join us next Wednesday as we review 12 Angry Men. Jeffrey will be our beautiful host, so I'll be talking a lot less. Some of you will love that. Some of you will hate it. The Jeffrey lovers will be eating next week. But again, thank you so much for joining us, guys. We're trying to build a community of movie lovers that love watching movies together weekly and talking about it. So if you guys had any thoughts, any hills you want to die on, any hills you want to be like, no, the pigeons deserve to die for this reason, or the priest was actually the worst character for this reason, please let us know. You can let us know at theholymomentpodcast@gmail.com. You can also let us know on our Instagram under the same name. If you want to send us any movie suggestions, if, like we were saying, if there are any females out there that are like, hey, this would be a great movie to watch, or just anyone else that has movies that they really love, feel free to tag us on Instagram or send us an email our way. Until then, we really appreciate you guys tuning in. We hope everyone has a wonderful week. And always remember, if you see a pigeon, it is probably a Nazi and you should probably kick it. Until next week, have yourself a tremendous day. Bye-bye.
Hey, motherfucker. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Dodge this.